Victor Riparbelli, welcome to the Ground Level AI podcast.
Thank you, Sharon. Excited to be here.
So I was so interested in talking to you because I don't know if you remember this, but we chatted back in the day. I think this was in 2023. I wrote a piece about Synthesia, and this was at VentureBeat. And so much has happened to the company since then. So much has happened in AI video since then, in terms of synthetic digital humans, avatars, all the things. So I guess the one thing I wanted to start with is what the biggest changes you see since we last spoke. I'm going to say this was like early 2023. ChatGPT had first come out. Synthesia had been around for already a few years then. But what are the biggest changes that you've seen in AI video, synthetic video in your business since then?
Yeah, so I would probably categorize that in sort of on two different dimensions. First is the technology has proved a ton back in 2023. And the other one would be sort of like maturity in terms of us humans figuring out like how to use these technologies, right? So if we start with the first bucket of like just the pure sort of advancements in the tech, back in 2023, AI video, I think it's safe to say sort of barely worked. We were one of the first companies who found an actual real use case, which was basically what we think of as like business videos, like explainer video, sort of edging or being a little bit like a PowerPoint, but a video version of it. It was definitely not around like, creative use cases, storytelling, creating ads, films, content that like a consumer would watch because it was interesting. And so now that has matured a lot. So now what we're seeing is that the AI video market has sharded into different directions. There's like some companies that are building for people who are more kind of professionals in video that want to create like really high quality ads. I think we're coming like Runway in there. There's companies like Hicksville that's growing super fast on basically being, consumers, all the kind of AI content that you see on places like TikTok and Instagram, creating advertised like product ads for e-commerce stores. More on the creative, the storytelling, very like consumerist by nature. And there's companies like us, we focus very much on the enterprise, basically helping, really companies of all sizes, but specifically the enterprise on creating what we still think of as mainly as being like business videos. So we're less focused on like ads, storytelling, sort of creative use cases. And we're very focused on things like product marketing. We're very focused on training, on enablement, on comms, and those kind of use cases. That's like one thing, and just purely like, what can you generate with AI and how real does it look is maybe the best way of thinking about this. Then the other dimension to this is real-time video now works. So we launched our first real-time product a few weeks ago. And what that means is that video can evolve from being a broadcast format, right? Where you create one video, everybody watches the same version of that video, to being much more interactive. And that unlocks a ton of new use cases. And we're making some really big bets on that being not the future of all video, but being a huge part of what we today think of as video that we use for work. So I'll give you maybe an example of like what this means in practice. So for us, training your sales team, for example, has always been a big use case of Synthesia. We figured out along with our customers some years ago that if you're trying to communicate something to someone, it's much better done in a video than in a long email or long document. People just retain more of the information. It's more engaging. You can have visual aids and so on and so forth, right? So we learn better through video, most of us. But with a normal video, the learning sort of ends at like you watch a video and you consume some information. And then you hope that the learner has internalized it, understands the content, and that they can figure out like how to then apply that in practice, right? Now we can go above or beyond just communicating something to someone. We can actually help someone practice. And the way we can help them practice is, let's say you've just done a training on a new product that you're learning how to sell. Then you can watch all the video content like you always would with Synthesia. But then we could go into this simulation, what we call roleplays, where you're talking to an avatar, which talks and responds in real time, so kind of like being on a Zoom call. And that avatar could, for example, pretend to be a customer. And then it's your job as a salesperson to run that conversation. The average session length right now is like 18 minutes. It's a pretty long conversation you have, and you basically treat it as if you were on a call with your customer. For the learner, this is amazing because you get to actually practice what you've learned, which is how most people learn. Before doing AI role plays, you'd go on a call with real customers, or you would role play with your manager, and then you would learn sort of on the job, right? Now you can do that in a safe space. it gives you a score after. So we can even tell you, okay, you're very good at following the sales methodology, but your product knowledge could be a little bit better. Setting up next steps, you were also very good at. And so we can give you very clear pointers on like what you're good at and what you're less good at, which is very helpful for the learner, but it's also helpful for the managerial level to get a sense of how well is your team actually performing across different dimensions. So that's pretty new. And we're launching a bunch of other products around this. So I think that's kind of covers the tech part of this. Of course, LLMs as an underlying technology getting better and cheaper powers a lot of this stuff. You can also now create videos instead of having to actually manually create them, or you can prompt saying, hey, make my video about how to onboard to my new product, and we'll actually give you like a draft you can work from. So the creation experience has gotten a lot easier with AI. And then the second part of it is just like, I think us humans and companies and businesses learning how to use AI video and where not to use AI video. The sort of general acceptance of consuming AI content. All that stuff has also changed a lot. Where back in 2023 and 2022, we're still very new. People still felt like it was a little bit strange. The quality wasn't really like that good. So it worked in a specific bunch of use cases. Other use cases, it didn't work that well. So sort of seeing the whole ecosystem and kind of best practice evolve has also been pretty exciting. And I think it's just a market that just keeps growing and growing.
What percentage of the videos that people create on Synthesia are versions of themselves, synthetic video of an actual person and videos that are not?
I don't have the exact number at hand, but it's something like 50-50. It's very popular to create an avatar of yourself. It depends a lot on the use case, but the split is I think roughly 50-50 now.
What are some of the use cases where it's not a specific person?
So often that's companies who creates like their kind of AI virtual coach, that they don't want to be a specific person, but want to be more sort of a mascot of the company, if you will. It could also be if you're operating in many different countries or geographies, you want to use an avatar that is, specific to that geography. Which, of course, if you have employees there, maybe you can use some of those. But if not, you can use some of the ones that's in our library. And then there's also still just some people that don't want to be on camera, don't like how they look and sound. That's a very natural thing, I think, for most people. And so they prefer to use kind of someone that's not themselves.
And what are the most popular use cases to actually have an avatar of yourself?
So training, marketing, enablement, those use cases generally work really well. For training, often if you have your sort of people who are internal trainers use their own avatar, then that creates more of like a connection with the person. People know who they are in the business. Executives can create their own avatar and they can do part of the training with that. I'd say in general, it's just like very customer dependent if people want to use themselves or they want to use one that's a kind of a stock actor. Historically, there's always been a lot of problems with using your own appearance in videos before AI video was a thing, because a lot of companies would end up with, let's say you filmed 100 videos with the best trainer on your team. That's great. But then at some point they leave the business. And then now you have a lot of videos with someone who's not in the business any longer. And maybe they actually don't really want to be in those videos anymore because they've moved on to a different job. Maybe they joined a competitor. That becomes kind of awkward. Like there's all these sort of things that makes it difficult. But because everything's AI video now, right? Even if you have created 100 videos with someone's avatar, you can very quickly just switch them out because obviously these things are generated. You don't have to like actually film it with a camera.
So when we first spoke in 2023, a lot of this was fairly new. I mean, there were a couple of competitors, but especially in the enterprise space, it was fairly new. And at the time, I remember there was a lot of discussion around deepfakes and how this fit into that. And would there be pushback against this? In some ways, that discussion still exists, of course. I mean, the discussions around deepfakes still exist. But how would you say the discussions in the enterprise companies have changed around acceptance of this, normality of this, how people react, and how you keep discussing the issues of deepfakes?
Yeah, so I think, compared to even just a few years ago, I think the discussion has matured a lot. I think what always happens when we invent new technologies is that the kind of first many years, people tend to think about all the ways it could go wrong because it's much easier to imagine than all the ways it could go right and what new use cases these kind of technologies will come with, right? I think now, the discussion is at a kind of, as I said, a more like reasonable level. I think everyone knows that there's real risks with these technologies. We're starting to see them. We can have good conversations about, okay, what harms are we actually seeing and how can we prevent that? And on the other hand, there's also, I think by now just, a lot more clear like why these technologies are so valuable, which obviously is a story we've been trying to tell for 10 years. But I think really the last 3 or 4 years, now it's just become just like using ChatGPT or other tools are kind of standard part of the toolbox in any company, right? I think in our specific case with enterprise, it's always been a topic. Like most enterprises want to buy from companies they feel they can trust. Companies do the right things. So things like moderation, ensuring you can't like create avatars of people that aren't yourself has always been very, very important to us. But I think when it comes to the actual kind of use cases, it is one of those things where like ultimately what most people are creating with our technology specifically is a video that tells your sales team how to sell something. It's a video that instructs your customer on how to set up the product. And in that context, it's much less of a conversation, I would say. I think where it becomes more of a conversation, rightly so, is like social media content, right? Where people need to know if it's AI generated or not, if it looks very real and it portrays some situation that may be very extreme or provoke a lot of emotions. In the enterprise space, that's sort of like generally less of a thing. So I think the discussion now is focused on like where it really matters. And I think we've gotten a little bit out of the sort of first couple of years of very kind of fear-driven way of thinking about these technologies.
One of the things that I feel like I've become more accustomed to, and I think others have too, is the idea of translation, creating these different videos within an enterprise and in different languages so that you can, share them across geographies. Is that something that you've noticed, that it's like at first that was very strange to people to see, this conversation that we're having translated into Spanish, for example, and you would even see my mouth, move differently with the other language. How have you seen that reaction change?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think for a lot of these use cases, they're very like practical utilitarian use cases where obviously if you have teams in different countries that need to consume the same content, it's a much better experience than using subtitles. And so that's become what I feel like is a pretty standard way of operating in most companies today. We launched our dubbing product. We launched it like 3 months ago, and it's really wild how good it is. You really both the quality of the translation, the quality of the lip sync, the way the voice is sort of kept intact. And I feel like with a lot of these technologies, it's like in one way you can position them as being like insanely sci-fi, completely new and crazy people have to get used to. And in other ways, it's just very much like a continuation of what we've always been doing. With subtitles, like if you are from Europe, there's a high probability you grew up with dubbed films. You would have a person literally talk, like the same person voiceovering every person in the film, right? Which artistically, you could argue destroys the film, but people still choose to watch that because they don't want to watch subtitles. And in some ways, this is just the better version of that, where you still get the actor's voice, you get the lip synchronization, it just looks and feels like much better. And I think that's what most people, when they look at these things, it's just like, is this actually a better experience than what we used to have? And in most cases, I think that's a resounding yes.
So I want to go back in time now. So Synthesia was founded in 2017. And I want to go even farther back. How did you get into this? I don't know if I ever asked you how this came about and how you got into this area.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Copenhagen, Denmark, and loved computers from an early age. And in my teenage years, sort of figured out that I was pretty good at it and I could make some money off it, building websites for local businesses, that sort of stuff. And from there on, moved into the Danish startup ecosystem, where I worked for a couple of years and figured out I wanted to build my own company. I always wanted to. I felt that in Denmark, I was doing a lot of business process tools, bookkeeping software, that sort of stuff. And I thought it was really fun to build products. But I always had this kind of deep personal interest in more like frontier technology. I loved sci-fi, loved kind of like where is it all going, and a bit sort of crazy ideas. So I decided to move to London and figure out what company I wanted to build, because Copenhagen is a great place, but isn't really the place to build a company like that. And so I spent a year figuring out what I wanted to build, met a lot of interesting people, among them my co-founder, Professor Matthias Niesner, who had done one of the first research papers around AI video technology back in 2016. He was at Stanford. And I saw this paper, which by today's standards, obviously...
It's called Face to Face. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So I saw that, and by today's standards, obviously it's not that impressive. But I remember just thinking, this is like...
What did the paper say that really made you excited?
Well, it was a demo video, right? So it's one of the first papers demonstrating a neural network, basically, producing video that felt and looked like pretty real. And I've always had a big interest in creative things in my spare time. So I make music. When I was a kid, I used to do like 3D rendering. A lot of friends that are into film and that sort of stuff, right? So I knew how difficult it is for Hollywood to produce what we think of as like a digital character, like CGI for a Hollywood film, like even creating a 30-second scene of like you or me talking. I mean, that used to be a massive investment in dollars and time and skills to get there, right? And I saw this paper and I was just like, this like technology is doing it completely automatically. The quality is in one way is like very good and more impressive than what Hollywood can produce. But what I think really got me very interested was the fact that it did it completely autonomously, right? It wasn't the result of like 10 people sitting on animating this video for a week to get it really perfect. It worked more or less like autonomously. And my mind just, kind of started racing. And I had this feeling that, at some point, we're going to be able to create video just from our laptop. Just like I can open my MacBook and I can make any song I can think about because I can use software instruments. I can sample things. If I want to write a book, I can do that on my MacBook, right? I can write it on the book and I can distribute on the internet. Like in other types of media, we'd already gone to fully digital creation flows. But back then with video, right, you were still dependent on having to use a camera, which just means that the sort of barriers to creation are much, much, much higher, right? You need to have physical equipment. You're bound by where in the world you are. If you want to do something like a film, you have to know the right people. You have to have someone invest, a lot of money in you to give you a chance, which is exactly what the music industry looked like if you go back to like the 80s and maybe the early 90s, right? And with the advent of like software to create music, we saw like this Cambrian explosion of new music. The barriers to like is much more about like the actual music you made rather than like if you lived in LA and you're a producer and were like in the right social circles, you could just create something great and share with the world. And I think that's the kind of core idea that got me really excited.
When did you see the intersection of the work you had done in like business processes and sort of the more unsexy side of this with AI video, which I do think most people would immediately go to like what Runway is doing, for example?
Yeah. Well, so in the early days, that was actually also the idea, right? I wanted to kind of, make films and creative and storytelling content because that was what was kind of in some ways like closer to me. But it was very obvious back then that technology is like, it just wasn't there. It was very hard to see a horizon for when that would actually work. I think what I brought with me from those days is as much as I would consider myself a creative person who loves all these things, I'm also very rational and kind of very practical. And I think trying to really understand how this technology could be made useful, especially in the early years before the technology really worked very well, was very helpful, right? I think what we did well compared to all the other people who were trying to do AI video at the time was that we were pretty realistic about you're not going to be able to create like Hollywood films or ads or all the kind of fun stuff for a while. But we uncovered that there was this market in the corporate world of much simpler video, right? Like people in the corporate world are trying to take a PowerPoint and make a video that engages better to like train an employee on how to work in a fast food restaurant. They're not trying to create like a Steven Spielberg masterpiece where you have to use AI to generate someone flying around in a helicopter and shooting the bad guys below, right? Like the kind of AI video, a person talking to the camera was a much more tractable problem back then. And so I think bringing some of that like realism and sort of business understanding into it was probably pretty key to getting us where we are today.
I often ask folks what it's like working with big enterprise companies. I feel like that's become a bit of a holy grail, even among the biggest frontier labs like OpenAI and Anthropic. But there's a lot of challenges there. These companies, it's not the same as just working with individuals. What was the most challenging thing about getting your product into some of the biggest Fortune 500 companies?
I think it takes a lot of patience. Closing a deal in enterprise, for example, is a lot more difficult than closing someone on a credit card and a self-service plan. They usually have different requirements, and you need to understand kind of like the selling part of building a business, right? That can be challenging because the feedback loop is a lot slower. Like if you just launch something, you give it to people on a credit card, and you run it for 3 months, you'll probably have somewhat of an idea of like, do people actually find this useful, or am I wasting my time? In the enterprise, selling in big deployment can easily be 6 to 12 months. And so the feedback cycle is a lot shorter, right? So the way we kind of circumvented that was we also had, and we still have today, a self-service offering where if you want, you can just go in, you can pay us, all the way down to like $15 and get started immediately and help giving us feedback. So I think the slow feedback cycles is definitely one thing that makes it more difficult. But on the other hand, I actually think working with enterprise customers is just great because you get to deal with people who are serious. They think well about what kind of software that they want to buy and what it needs to do for them. They are generally, if you work with very small businesses, then I think there's sometimes a tendency that like in a small business, the percentage of like their revenue that they spend on buying your product can for them be very high, which means they expect a lot of support. They expect FaceTime with the founder at all times. They expect to take all the feature requests and sort of like do them, but they're not necessarily paying the price tag that kind of warrants you to do that, right? And so that's often what you see in a lot of these businesses, that the SMB market is historically like can be pretty difficult to work with because of this. Whereas in enterprise, you get bigger contract sizes, which also makes it easier to give a much more kind of white glove service.
So coming back to the present, the models that are out there, this is the era of AI agents. Everyone's talking about autonomous agents, security, privacy. Where does Synthesia fall in here? How do you handle all of these issues in the current era that we're in?
So for us, because we've been around for quite a long time, right? And we've invested a lot in enterprise-grade security and moderation and all sort of things. We're in a really good spot to roll this out. As I mentioned earlier, like our real-time product is truly an agentic product in the sense that you're going in, you're actually speaking to basically an LLM with a face, right? That obviously creates more risks, which the enterprise is very cautious about. Like you want to make sure that you don't hallucinate. There's a lot of like additional considerations in the agent era that everyone is sort of wrestling with. But I think we're very well set up to do that. We also have things like our what we call our assistant, which is you can kind of give our agent a PowerPoint or PDF or just a prompt, and we actually help you kind of design the video for you, almost as like you were working with a junior video editor who can like put some content together for you. And those sort of things, right? The results become better if you have access to more data from the customer, because then the LLM can go in and they can better like personalize the content or understand more about their specific company. And those are definitely more difficult to get through in the enterprise. Goes a bit to the point before about like slower feedback cycles. But once you're kind of in and you're through the door, it makes the product a lot better and the customer's a lot happier.
That's really interesting what you said about LLM with a face. I didn't really think of it that way, but is that how you communicated to your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the right way of thinking about it. And there's like, I think of all the agent experiences that we're going to be having. I think in a couple of years, probably almost every interaction we'll have with a computer is going to be an agent in some way, shape, or form. And there's going to be a lot of different agent experiences. There's going to be some of them that's going to be great for like the video use case that we have, and there's going to be some that would be really annoying if they had a face, right? If you're just if you want to ask like customer support, if your refund is on the way because you send a package back, you probably don't want an avatar to pop up in your face and really show you all sorts of stuff, right? You probably just want a text message back.
Right.
If you want to call a restaurant or have a simple question to answer on customer support, you probably also prefer to just pick up your phone, call a number, and have a conversation. Or if you're trying to learn something, trying to teach a salesperson how to conduct a really complex sale, you don't want to do that through a chat. You probably don't want to do that through a phone call. You want that to be an experience where there's an avatar you're talking to, and the avatar can draw on the screen. If it needs to show you a table, they can pull up a table. They can pull in a video to show you something, just like you would in a classroom, right? You want the combination of both of those things. But of course, the underlying technology to all these things is LLMs, right? It is the fact that we now have reasoning as a technology that we can integrate into all of our products. And I think that's what really makes it agentic, right? Is that you have this sort of LLM-driven foundation that helps you do all sorts of stuff.
What do you see as the sort of frontier edge of where you and other competitors are now as far as AI video? Like, what do you feel like you're just getting to, but that we might see, 6 months from now, a year from now?
I think it's very much the real-time element. I think there'll for sure be a place for more kind of broadcast video. But I think especially in a work context, I think so much of what today would be a video or PDF is going to be more of an interactive experience, because it's just, for most people, we learn much better through conversation than we do from sort of passively consuming something, right? That's also how it works in schools. Generally, like, you consume some curriculum, then you have a teacher that helps you understand and examinates you and does all these different things.
Are there a couple of examples that you can give of companies that you work with and what they're most interested in doing that maybe they couldn't do a year ago?
Yeah, so we work with one of the most fastest growing companies right now in manager training. So they have, I think it's 2,000 or 3,000 people managers in their business, and there's a lot of transformation that's going on right now. They're changing the way they work, obviously because of AI, and a lot of kind of like managerial investments to make. Right. So what they use our roleplay product for is helping people practice difficult conversations. So that could be giving harsh feedback. It could be giving positive feedback. It could be dealing with two people in the organization who don't like each other and to have a conversation with them. And historically, again, an HR person would maybe role play with you to try and like, okay, so what do you do in this scenario if the person becomes really angry or becomes really sad or becomes very happy? How do you actually react in those situations? You would have a coach to do that or someone from the HR team. Now you can scale up these conversations so that everyone can get a safe space to practice before they need to have these conversations, which is better for the person conducting conversation and also the person on the other end, right? Another use case is training a sales team where we have a customer that rolled out a new product and it isn't performing as well as they would have liked. And so they're trying to figure out, is it because the product isn't good enough or is it because the sales team isn't well enough enabled to actually sell it? That's very hard to figure out, right? Now what they're doing is to do these role plays where everyone on the sales team jumps in to kind of a call with one of the avatars that pretends to be a customer. They hold the conversation and then they can get a score after to show what are they good at, what are they less good at. Very helpful for themselves to become better, but also helpful for the managerial and executive team to get an understanding of, across all these like simulated conversations, how many people actually kind of pass the bar of what you're supposed to know, right? And then based off that, you can then provide more training, or if there's an insight about the product, there's a lot of different ways to use it, which is very exciting and very hard to do if you're not using an AI to do it.
So everything we've been talking about is very much based in current reality, where these are companies that are actually looking to deploy things now and do things with their employees or their customers. I recently wrote an essay where I talked about the fact that a lot of the frontier labs, in addition to working with enterprise companies or selling their computer products, they're very prone to what I think of as prophecy. They're always prophesizing about what's going to happen in the future when it comes to AI, the future of humanity, whether it's, the promise of abundance or the promise or the warning of some kind of catastrophe, even human extinction. I was wondering how you handle that type of discourse out there in the, online, at conferences, in the world, when you're working on doing these very like fundamental things, deploying in the enterprise. It just feels so contradictory to me a lot of the time.
For sure. I mean, I think there's like, what is like, philosophizing, trying to like in public talk about what actually going to happen with technologies, which obviously is a good thing. There's like part of it, which is probably marketing of like, whatever you're selling. If you're telling everyone you're going to be the last company in the world, that's probably a good company to invest in. Like, there's a lot of like different incentive structures in this. There's also just making noise, just for the sake of making noise. I think in the AI economy, one thing that has proven to be true is that the more noise you can make, the faster the company will probably grow. And there's a lot of different ways of making noise. One of it is coming with these kind of prophecies, right? I think as a baseline, we have to be very realistic that absolutely no one knows what's going to happen. Historically, we've been incredibly bad at predicting anything about what the next 5 or 10 years is going to look like, right? And I think that holds true for AI as well. That, of course, doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it and have a point of view on it. I know a lot of these people, and I think most people in the industry, are genuinely oscillating between a lot of bad things that could happen, there's a lot of good things that can happen. What can we do to push it in the good direction? But no one knows, right? Like, you go 2 years back and try to predict what would happen in AI video or AI today, no one knows what's actually going to happen. I think that's very important to remember as we listen to all these like different voices. Specifically for like operating in enterprise, I think the philosophical aspect is important to a lot of people. Everyone is thinking about what is a business going to look like in 5 or 10 years. There'll be some people who tell you that it's just going to be agents. That's going to be maybe like a board of directors. The company's going to run itself. There's other people who think that's not going to be the case. I put myself in that camp. I think the core DNA of a great company today is great people. And I think it's going to be exactly the same in 10 years' time. But I think a lot of executives like are rightly thinking about this as well. So I would say we try and be very practical about how we can help businesses today, but also share our point of view and like what we think the world's going to look like and what we're trying to build from our little corner of the world. And that matters a lot, actually, because I think a lot of customers today are as much picking vendors as they're picking specific products, right? What's a company where you buy into the vision, not just like what we have right now, but what we'll have in 6 months and 12 months and 5 years, rather than sort of just only evaluating what's the product on the shelf today and how does it compare to the competitors. A lot of these companies that aren't like AI native, I think, are looking for partners to help them build their companies into the future. And I get the sense that that's quite important to a lot of companies who are procuring technology today.
Well, so last question for you. If you were going to look into a crystal ball and tell me, I actually have a hard time getting people to tell me what they think is going to happen 6 months from now a lot of the time. But do you have any, little inklings of what you think is really going to happen, 6, 12 months from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I gave you like my general train of thought, right? Which, as I said before, no one knows. I think the narrative around the world being just run by AI and we'll just like sit back and do nothing or do something completely different, I don't think it's going to hold. I still think humans is going to be a super important part of running a business. And I think oftentimes there's a bit of a tendency in Silicon Valley to be very bubble-like in the sort of perception of how the world actually works. I think what we'll see is that Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, all these companies are going to be, gigantic companies. They're going to power so many other companies and applications with their models. But I don't think they're going to be able to suck up all the demand for every single use case. When you go out, like we've even seen it to some extent, right? Like OpenAI tried to do both shopping, they tried to do voice, they tried to do video, they tried to do a lot of other things, and had to eventually roll back on that because no matter how much money you have and how much people you have, the power of like a single team focusing on one specific use case just really works, right? Customers want someone to call who's an expert in using AI for legal things. That's why we have Legora and Harvey, for example. Companies want an AI video platform, which is not just a model, it's a product, it's an application around it that makes it really easy for a human to use. So I think we'll see the application there is going to thrive. I think we'll have lots of different companies, lots of different products. The way we build products will change. People will be building things much faster than what they could before. But it also puts the onus on building the right things, right? There's this idea of like AI slop that's very prevalent right now. Everyone's talking about it it could be videos on Instagram that's made just to shock and get engagement and get some views and someone makes some money off that. There's like go on LinkedIn and every second post you read like feels like it's just an LLM that's regurgitating something which at first glance may sound like really smart, but actually it's just a lot of like fancy words thrown together. I think they actually just added something we can report something for being AI slop. I think we're going to see the same thing with products, right? Like if you have infinite choice and you can build any feature you want in 2 days, we're going to have a lot of companies that's going to build a lot of features that aren't going to be very cohesive. And in many ways might actually, I think, detract from the product. If there's one thing we know from the lessons of design over the last many, many years is that more is not always better, right? A lot of the times less is more. Well thought out workflows can be a lot more. And so I think we'll see that the sort of skill around like taste and design is going to be really important moving forward. And it's not always going to be just about who can write the most lines of code in the shortest amount of time possible. And then maybe the last thing I would say is what generally always happens is that whatever becomes scarce in society, the value of that goes up, right? And so I think if we move into a world in which we're interacting with AI like almost all the time, the value of a real human interaction will actually go up significantly. And I think that can also mean a shift in how we allocate value in society. Right now, like the highest paid jobs is generally jobs that are very like numerical and logical, it's like software, finance, those kind of areas, right? Maybe if those areas actually become sort of less difficult, we can automate those away. Maybe valuable go back to things that matter to most of us, which is like going to a really nice restaurant, going to a concert, having a great meeting with a salesperson who will really understand you and your business. It can be hard to imagine sometimes, but if you look at the world history, right, again, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen. And I don't think that most people will just like not want to be dealing with humans in business and just talk to agents all day. I could, of course, be wrong, but I tend to think that the human element is going to be, and I actually think with AI, we can probably spend our human time with each other on more valuable things. Right now, there's a lot of meetings which are just repeatable, standardized. You know, I go on a call with you and I ask the same 10 questions and I do this 10 times a day, which is not very fun for me and probably not for you either. If we can get rid of those things and focus on being creative together or bonding, building connections. Like I do think there's going to be, I think human relations is going to be as important as ever as we go into the future.
Well, I agree with you there. Victor Riparbelli, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sharon.